All right. All right. So, Black Power, its relevance to the West Indies. Here we go. About a fortnight ago, I had the opportunity of speaking on Black Power to an audience on this campus. At the time, the consciousness among students, as far as the radical question is concerned, had been heightened by the several incidents on the world scene, notably the hangings in Rhodesia and the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King. Indeed, it has been heightened to such an extent that some individuals have started to organize a Black Power movement. My presence here attests to my full sympathies with their objectives. The topic on this occasion is no longer just Black Power, quote unquote, but Black Power and you, quote unquote. Black Power can be seen as a movement and an ideology springing from the reality of oppression of Black peoples by whites within the imperialist world as a whole. Now we need to be specific in defining the West Indian scene and in our own practical particular roles in the society. And you and I have to decide whether we want to think black or to remain as a, quote, dirty version of white. I shall indicate the full significance of this later. Recently, there was a public statement in Scoop where Black Power was referred to as black supremacy, quote unquote. This may be a genuine error or a deliberate falsification. Black Power is a call for Black peoples to throw off white domination and resume the handling of their own destinies. It means that Black people would enjoy power, commiserate with their numbers in the world and the particular localities. Whenever an oppressed Black man shouts for equality, he is called a racist. This was said of Marcus Garvey in his days. Imagine that. We are so inferior that if we demand equality of opportunity and power, that is outrageously racist. Black people who speak up for their rights must be aware to this device of false accusation. It is intended to place you on the defensive and, if possible, embarrass you into silence. How can we both be oppressed and embarrassed? It is that our major concern is not to hurt the feelings of the oppressor. Black people must now take the offensive. If it is anyone who should suffer embarrassment, it is the whites. Did Black people roast unalive 6 million Jewish people? Who exterminated millions of indigenous inhabitants in the Americas and Australia? Who enslaved countless millions of Africans? The white capitalist cannibal has always fed on the world's Black peoples. White capitalist imperialist societies is profound and unmistakably racist. The West Indies have always been a part of white capitalist societies. We have been the most oppressed section because we were a slave society, and the legacy of slavery still rests heavily upon the West Indian Black man. I will briefly point to five highlights of our social development. Number one, the development of racialism under slavery. 2, emancipation. 3, indigenous indentured laborer. 4, the year 1865 in Jamaica. And 5, the year 1938 in West Indies. Slavery, as C.L.L. James, Eric Williams, and other WI scholars have pointed out, slavery in the West Indies starting as an economic phenomenon rather than a racial one. But it rapidly became racist as all white labor was withdrawn from the fields, leaving black people to be identified with slave labor and white to be linked with property and domination. Out of this situation where black people had an inferior status in practice, they grew social and scientific theories related to the supposed inherent inferiority of the black man, who was considered as having been created to bring water and hew wood for the white man. This theory then served to rationalize white exploitation of black people all over Africa and Asia. The West Indies and the South and American South share the dubious distinction of being the breeding ground for world racialism. Naturally, our own society provided the highest expression of racialism. Even black people became convinced of their own inferiority. Though fortunately, we are capable of the most intense expressions when we recognize that we have been duped by the white man. Black power recognizes both the reality of black oppression and self-negation, as well as the potential for revolt, emancipation. By the end of the 18th century, Britain had got most of what it wanted from black labor in the West Indies. Slavery and the slave trade had made Britain strong and now stood in the way of new developments. So it was time to abandon those systems. The slave trade and slavery were thus ended, but Britain had to consider how to squeeze that little remaining in the territories and how to maintain the local whites in power. They therefore decided to give the planters 20 million pounds compensations and to guarantee their black labor supply for the next 6 years through the system called apprenticeship. In that period, white society consolidated its position to ensure that slave relations should persist in our society. The Rastafari Brethren have always insisted that black people were promised 20 million pounds at emancipation. In reality, by any normal standards, the justice we, not me, black people, should have got the 20 million pounds compensation money. We were the ones who had been abused and wronged, hunted in Africa, and brutalized on the plantations. In Europe, when serfdom was abolished, the serfs usually inherited the land as compensation and by right. In the West Indies, the explorers were compensated because they could no longer exploit us in the same way as before. White property was of greater value than black humanity. It still is. White property is of greater value than black humanity in the British West Indies today, especially here in Jamaica. Indigenous indentured labor. Britain and the white West Indians had to maintain the plantation system in order to keep white supremacy. When Africans started leaving the plantations to set up as independent peasants, they threatened the plantation structure, and therefore indigenous were imported under the indentured agreements. I think that's Indians from India. Yeah. That was possible because white power controlled most of the world and could move non-white peoples around as they wished. It was from British control India that the indentured labor was obtained. It was the impact of British commercial, military, and political policies that was destroying the life and culture of 19th century India and forcing people to flee to other parts of the world to earn bread. Look where Indians fled: to the West Indies. The West Indies is a place black people want to leave, not to come to. One must therefore appreciate the pressures of white power in India, which gave rise to the migration of the West Indies. Indians from India, of course, were brought here solely in the interest of white society. The expense of Africans already in West Indies, and often against their own best interests. For Indians perceived indentured labor to be a form of slavery, and it was eventually terminated through the pressures of Indian opinion in the homeland. The West Indies was has made a unique contribution to the history of suffering in the world, and Indians have provided part of that contribution since indentures were first introduced. This is another aspect of the historical situation which is still with us. 1865. In that year, Britain found a way to perpetuating white power in the West Indies after ruthlessly crushing the revolts of our black brothers led by Paul Bungley. The British government took away the Constitution of Jamaica and placed the island under a complete control of colonial office, a maneuver that was racially motivated. The Jamaican legislators was then largely in the hands of the local whites, with the half white, half black, they use the N-word, minority. But if the gradual changes continue, the half white, half black, they use the N-word, would have taken control, and black people were next in line. Consequently, the British government put a stop to the process of a gradual takeover of political power by black people. When we look at the British Empire in the 19th century, we see a clear difference between white colonies and black colonies. In the white colonies, like Canada and Australia, the British were given white people their freedom and self-rule. In the black colonies of the West Indies, Africa, and Asia, the British were busy taking away the political freedom of the inhabitants. Actually, on the constitutional level, Britain had already displayed its racialism in the West Indies in the early 19th century when it refused to give half white, half black, they used the N-word, the power of government in Trinidad, although they were the majority of free citizens. In 1865, in Jamaica, it was not the first nor the last on which Britain made it clear that its white, Keith and Ken, quote unquote, would be supported to hold dominion over black people. In 1938, slavery ended in various islands of the West Indies between 1834 and 1838. Exactly 100 years later, between 1934 and 38, the black people in the West Indies revolted against the hypercritical freedom of the society. The British were very surprised. They had long forgotten all about black people in the British West Indies, and they sent a royal commission to find out what it was all about. The report of the conditions was so shocking that the British government did not release it until after the war, because they wanted black colonies to fight the white man's battle. By the time the war ended, it was clear that the West Indies and throughout Asia and Africa that some conscious concessions would have to be made to black peoples. Just gonna look back real quick. Oh, look, someone's saying a cry section. Oh, that's awesome. Where is that? Where is that book? Where is that book? Where we at in the book? We are on chapter 3. We are in 42 on the PDF. Sorry, I didn't see that earlier. Okay. I have no idea who these people are. In general, the problem as seen by white imperialists was to give enough power to certain groups in colonial society to keep the whole society from exploding and to maintain the essentials of the imperialist structure. In British West Indies, they had to take into account the question of military strategy because we lie under the belly of the world's imperialist giant, the USA. Besides, there was a new and vital mineral, bauxite, which had to be protected. The British solution was to pull out everywhere possible and leave the imperial government in the hands of the US, while the local government was given to a white, brown, or black petty bourgeoisie, who were culturally the creations of white capitalist societies and who therefore supported the white imperialist system because they gained personally and because they have been brainwashed into aiding the oppression of black people. Black power in the West Indies means 3 closely related things. Number 1, The break with imperialism, which is historically white racist. 2. The assumption of power by the black masses in the islands. Number 3, the cultural construction of the society in the image of black people. I shall anticipate certain questions on who are black people in the West Indies, since they are in fact questions which have been posed to me elsewhere. I maintain that it is the white world which has defined who are black people. If you are not white, then you are black. However, it is obvious that the West Indies situation is complicated by factors such as the variety of racial types and racial mixtures, and by the process of class formation. We have, therefore, to note not simply that the white world says, but also how individuals perceive each other. Nevertheless, we can talk of the mass of the West Indian population as being black, either African or Indian. There seems to have been some doubts on the last point of some fear that black power is aimed against the Indian. It would be a flagrant denial of both the historical experience of the West Indies and the reality of the contemporary scene. And every time I say Indian, it's from people from India. Just want to make sure. Victimization session. You are wild, my friend. While the Indians were brought to the West Indies, he met the same racial contempt which whites applied to Africans. The Indian, too, was reduced to a single stereotype. I cannot say this. I think it's a slur towards Indian people. It's Coolie, or laborer. He, too, was a hewer of wood and a bringer of water. I spoke earlier that the revolt of black people in the West Indies in 1938, that revolt involved Africans in Jamaica, Africans and Indians in Trinidad and Guyana. The uprising in Guyana were actually led by Indian sugar workers. Today, some Indians, like some Africans, have joined the white power structures in terms of economic activity and culture. But the underlying reality is that poverty resides among Africans and Indians in the West Indies, and that power is denied them. Black power in the West Indies therefore refers primarily to people who are recognizably African or Indian. The Chinese, on the other hand, are a former laboring group who have now become bastions of white West Indian social structure. The Chinese of the People's Republic of China have long broken with and are fighting against white imperialism. But our Chinese have nothing to do with that movement. They are to be identified as Chiang Kai-shek, with Chiang Kai-shek. And Chiang Kai-shek was one of the overlords that were keeping the oppression of Chinese people. So that's why they're doing that. So they say that the Chinese people in the West Indies were identified with Chiang Kai-shek and not with Chairman Mao Zedong. They are to be put in the same bracket as the lackeys of capitalism and imperialism, who are to be found in Hong Kong and Taiwan. Whatever the circumstances in which the Chinese came to West Indies, they soon became, as a group, members of the exploiting class. They will have either to relinquish or to be deprived of what functions before they can be reintegrated into the West Indian society, where black men walks in dignity. The same applies to the half white, half black, they use the N-word, another group about whom I have been questioned. The West Indian brown man is characterized by ambiguity and ambivalence. He has in the past identified with the black masses when it suited his interests, and at the present time, some brown people are in the forefront of the movement towards black consciousness. But the vast majority have fallen to the bribes of white imperialism, often outdoing the whites in their hatred the whites in their hatred and oppression of black people. Garvey wrote of the Jamaican quote unquote, half black, half white, they use the M word, quote, I was openly hated and persecuted by some of these people of color, men of the island, who did not want to be classified as black, but as white, end quote. Naturally, conscious West Indian black people, like Garvey, have in turn expressed their dislike for brown people. But there is nothing in the West Indian experience which suggests that brown people are unacceptable when they choose to identify with black people. The post-1938 developments, in fact, show exactly the opposite. It seems to me, therefore, that it is not for the Black Power movement to determine the position of brown people, of indigenous people, and so-called West Indian whites. The movement can only keep the door open and leave it to those groups to make their choice. Black Power is not racially intolerant. Or is it radically? It's radically, right? Racially. No, that's a D. Racially intolerant. It is the hope of the black man that he should have power over his own destinies. This is not incompatible with the multiracial society where each individual counts equally, because the moment that power is equitable, distributed among several ethnic groups, the very relevance of making the distinction between groups will be lost. What we must object to is the current image of the multiracial society living in harmony. In this, that is a myth designed to justify exploitation suffering by the blackest of our population at the hands of the lighter skinned groups. Let us look at the features of the racial composition of the Jamaican population. Of every 100 Jamaicans, 76.8% are visibly African, 0.8% European, 1.1% Indian, 8.6% Chinese, 91% have African blood, 0.1% Syrian, 14.6% Afro-European, 5.4% other mixtures. This is a... Oh, wait, hold on, let me look in mixture. No, they haven't given... I guess they gave up. Unless you guys, like, block them and shit. All right. This is a black society where Africans preponderate. Preponderate. I wonder what preponderate means. Let's go look it up. I found it. Look at me finding things. Preponderate. Sorry, I'm making which is be greater in the number, influence, or importance. Preponderate. Here we go. The lid blocked me. Oh no, I'm sorry. Of course they did. Apart from the half black, half white, they use the M word mixture, all other groups are numerically insignificant, and yet the society seeks to give them equal weight, and indeed more weight than the Africans. If we went to Britain, we could easily find non-white groups in the above proportion. Africans and West Indians and Pakistanians, people, Turkish people, Arabic people, and other Easterners. But Britain is not called a multiracial society. When we go to Britain, we do not expect to take over all of the British real estate businesses, all their cinemas, and most of their commerce, as the European, Chinese, and Syrian have done here. All we ask for there is some work and shelter. We cannot even get that. Black power must proclaim that Jamaica is a black society. We should fly Garvey's Black Star banner, and we will treat all other groups in the society on that understanding. They can have the basic rights of all individuals, but no privileges to exploit Africans, as has been the pattern during slavery and ever since. The present government knows that Jamaica is a black man's country. That is why Garvey has been made a national hero, for they are trying to deceive black people into thinking that the government is with them. The government of Jamaica recognizes black power. It is afraid of the potential wrath of Jamaicans, black and largely African population. It is the same fear that forced them to declare mourning when black men were murdered in Rhodesia and when Martin Luther King was murdered in the US. But black people don't need to be told that Garvey is a national hero. They already know that. Nor do they need to be told to mourn when black people are murdered by white power, because they mourn every day right here in Jamaica, where white power keeps them ignorant, unemployed, ill-clothed, and ill-fed. They will stop mourning when things change, and that means a revolution for the first essential to break the chains which binds us to white imperialism. And that is a very revolutionary step. Cuba is the only country in the West Indies and in the hemisphere which has broken with white power. That is why Stokely Carmichael can visit Cuba, but he can't visit Trinidad or Jamaica. That is why Stokely can call Fidel, quote, one of the blackest men in the Americas, end quote. And that is why our leader, in contrast, qualified as quote unquote white. Here, I am not just playing with words. I'm extending the definition of white power by indicating that nature of its opposite, quote, white power. And I am providing a practical illustration of what black power means in one particular West Indian community where it already occurred. White power is the power of whites over black people without any participation of black people. White power rules the imperialist world as the whole. In Cuba, black people and half black, half white number in 1,585,073 out of the population of 5,829,029. And in 1953, i.e., about 1/4 of the population. Like Jamaicans, black people today, they were the poorest and the most depressed people on the island. Lighter-skinned Cubans held local power, while real power was in the hands of the U.S. imperialists. Black Cubans fought alongside white Cuban workers and peasants because they were all oppressed. Major Juan Alameda, one of the outstanding leaders of Cuba today, was one of the original guerrillas in the Sierra Maestra, and he is black. Black Cubans today enjoy political, economic, and social rights and opportunities of exactly the same kind as white Cubans. They too bear arms in Cuba, militia, as an expression of their basic rights. In other words, white power in Cuba is ended. The majority of the white population naturally predominates numerically in most spheres of activity, but they do not hold dominion over black people without regard to the latter's interests. Black people have achieved power consumerate with their own numbers by their heroic fighting against imperialism. Having achieved their rights, they can in fact afford to forget the category black and think simply as Cuban citizens, as socialists equal to as men. In Jamaica, where black people are far greater in numbers and have no whites alongside them as oppressed workers and peasants, it will be the black people who alone can bear the brunt of revolutionary fight. Trotsky once wrote that revolution is a carnival of the masses. When we have that carnival in the West Indies, are we Are people like us here at the university going to join the, oh my gosh, I don't know this word, the bacchanal? Let me look at this word. Bacchanal. I had it right. But I think we should like see what it means. Come on. Effects. So bacchanal. An occasion of wild and drunken revel. I can't say that. I think it's the top one. All right. Effects. It's always the effects. Come on. There we go. Back to the normal. It's a party. Okay, thank you. Let us have a look at our present position. Most of us who have studied at the UIW are discernibly black, and yet we are undeniably part of the white imperialist system. A few are actively pro-imperialist. They have no confidence in anything that is not white. They talk nonsense about black people being lazy, which is not a thing. The same nonsense which has said about the Jamaican black man after emancipation, although he went to Panama to perform the giant task of building the Panama Canal. The same nonsense which is said about WI unemployed today, and yet they proceed to England to run the whole transport system. Most of us do not go to quite the same extremes in degrading ourselves and our black brothers. But we say nothing against the system, and that means that we are acquiescing in the exploitation of our brethren. One of the ways that the situation has persisted, especially in recent times, is that it has given a few individuals like you and I a version of personal progress measured in terms of front lawn and of the latest model of a huge American car. This has recruited us into their ranks and deprived the black masses of an articulate leadership. That is why at the outset I stressed that our choice has to remain as part of the white system or to break with it. There is no other alternative. Black power in the WI must aim to transform the black intelligentsia into the servants of the black masses. Black power within the universities and without must aim to overcome white cultural imperialism. Whites have dominated us both physically and mentally. This fact is brought out in virtually any serious sociological study and of the region. The brainwashing process has been so stupendous that it has convinced so many black men of their inferiority. It will simply draw a few illustrations. I will simply draw a few illustrations to remind you of this fact which black people like us, not me, these people, at Mona prefer to forget. The adult black in our West Indian society is fully conditioned to thinking white, because that is the training we are given from childhood. The little black girl plays with a white doll, identifying with it as she combs its flaxen hair. Asked to stretch the figure of a man or woman, the black schoolboy instinctively produces a white man or a white woman. This is not surprising, since until recently the illustration of our textbooks were all figures of Europeans. A few changes have taken place, have barely scratched the surface of the problem. In West Indies, every every color still aspires to European standards of dress and beauty. The language which is used by black people is describing ourselves, shows how we despise our African appearance. Quote, good hair means European hair. Good nose means straight nose. Good complexion means light complexion. Everybody recognizes how encourageous and ridiculous such terms are, but we continue to use them as to express our support of the assumption that white Europeans have the monopoly on beauty and that black people is the incarnation of ugliness. That is why Black Power advocates finding it necessary to assert that black is beautiful in big, bold letters. Hold on. Okay, cool. The most profound revelation of the sickness of our society on the question of race is our respect for all the white symbols of Christian religion. God the Father is white. Son of God is white. And presumably, God and the Holy Spirit is white also. The disciples and saints are white. All the cherubim, seraphim, and angels are white. Except Lucifer, of course, who was black, being embodied of evil, being embodiments of evil. When one calls upon black people to reject these things, this is not an attack on the teachings of Christ or the ideals of Christianity. What we have to ask is, quote, why should Christianity come to us all wrapped up in white? End quote. The white race constitutes about 20% of the world's population, and yet non-white people are supposed to accept that all who inhabit the heavens are white. There are 650 million Chinese why shouldn't God and most of the angels be Chinese? The truth is that there is absolutely no reason why different racial groups should not provide themselves with their own religious symbols. A picture of Christ could be red, white, or black, depending upon the people who are involved. When Africans adopt the European concept that purity and goodness must be painted white, and all that is evil is damned, and damned is to be painted black. When we are fragrantly self-insulting through the manipulation of this media of education and communication, white people have produced black people who minister the system and perpetuate the white values, quote, white-hearted black men, end quote, as they are called by conscious elements. This is as true of the indigenous as it is true of the Africans in the West Indian society. Indeed, the basic explanation of the tragedy of African / I don't know if it's people from India, but I'm going to India confrontation in Guyana and Trinidad. It is the fact that both groups are held captive by the European way of seeing things. When an African abuses an Indian, people from India, he repeats all that the white man said about Indian indentured people. They used a slur. And in turn, the Indians have borrowed from the whites a stereotype of the lazy N-word, quote unquote, to apply to Africans beside him. It is as though no black man can see another black man except by looking through a white person. It is time we start seeing through our own eyes. The road to black power here in the West Indies and elsewhere must begin with revelation of ourselves as black people and with the redefinition of the world from our own standpoint. And that's the end of chapter 3. We're on chapter 4. African history and culture. Gonna look back. All right, just looking back. Okay, here we go. All right. African History and Culture, Chapter 4. And it looks like number 1. Every human society has a history and a form of culture, and this includes Africa. Africans in the West have been deliberately kept arrogant with African achievements by the white man for centuries. The purpose of their policy was to build up a picture of barbarous Africa, so that we Africans who had been removed from our homes and made into slaves would be afraid to admit, even to ourselves, that we were Africans. In the West Indies, names like, I don't know if I can say this, Bungo and Quache, which refers to Africans, are names which most black people hate, and our knowledge of Africa is got from reading Tarzan comic books. Ew. We are the only group in the world who deny ourselves, preferring to be known as they used N-word with the OES, referring to black, rather than Africans. In order to know ourselves, we must learn about African history and culture. This is one of the most important steps forward towards creating unity among Africans at home and abroad. Africa is the home of mankind. The human beings came into existence on the African continent nearly 2 million years ago. The human society and culture reached great heights in Africa before the white men arrived. We must learn something about the following African kingdoms and empires. On the Nile River, there was Egypt and Meru, Sudan. These kingdoms flourished on earth before the birth of Christ, and Egypt in particular is recognized as having contributed greatly to the modern world. Its huge pyramids and sculptures are still considered as wonders, and mankind has never rediscovered some of the technical skills which the Egyptians possessed, such as the art of preserving the dead body. Europeans have long refused to accept the simple geographical fact that ancient Egypt, like modern Egypt, was an African country, and even though some of its culture came from Asia, its achievements must go to the credit of Africa. Meroe, Meroe, produced a culture very similar to Egypt, and also ruled over Egypt for a long period. The Egyptians were Africans, a light complexion, while the people of Meroe were dark-skinned. B. In ancient Ethiopia, there was a kingdom of Aksum, forerunner to the Ethiopian kingdom, and the written language of Aksum was called Ge'ez, G-E-E-Z, and it is still used within the Ethiopian church today. Aksum, along with other parts of ancient Ethiopia, is famous for its architecture, especially its tall and finely carved stone pillars, and its church is carved out of solid rock. C. In West Africa, some of the most powerful political states in Africa began to develop some 1,500 years ago, and their period of greatness lasted more than 1,200 years. These kingdoms bore the name of Ghana, Mali, and Sangai, and Kanum, and they all arose near the great Niger River. They were noted for their agricultural production, their learning, and their commerce, especially in gold. These states also encouraged the religion of Islam, while Ethiopia, of course, was the center of Christianity. Part 2. Apart from the states of Egypt, Meroe, Aksum, Ghana, Mali, and Sangai, and Kenem, Kanem, which have already been mentioned, where there were many others in different parts of Africa which achieved greatness before the arrival of white men, and before we were snatched away as slaves. On the West African coast, the states of Benin and Oyo were famous in Central Africa. We can take, for as example, Congo and Manitoba, Zimbabwe. And in East Africa, two of the oldest kingdoms were those of the Benerio and the Baganda. All of these were strange names because we have never been taught anything about them. If we want to call ourselves conscious Africans, we must know the map of Africa. We must remember the names of these great African states, and we must find out as much as possible about them to get the reconnection. Hello. Is there anybody in the, I don't think there's anybody in the thing. That's that one dude. However, the majority of Africans lived in small societies, and these must also be seriously studied. Sometimes it is felt that only the large political states can one find civilization and culture. But this is wrong. And in the great political states of Europe and America today, many human values have been destroyed. While even the smallest African village was a place for development and protection of individuals. Certain things were outstanding in an African way of life, rather in small or large societies. These distinctive things in Africa, in an African way of life, amounted to African culture. Among the principles of African culture, the following are to be noted: hospitality, respect, especially to elders, importance of women, especially in the case of inheritance, humane treatment of lawbreakers, spiritual reflection, common use of the land, consistent employment of music, especially drums and bright colors. Some of these principles are found in many different human societies, but very few are encouraged in the present white capitalist world. Even in Africa itself, European slaves trading the colonization have destroyed many aspects of African culture. But culture is not a dead thing, nor does it always remain the same. It belongs to living people and is therefore always developing. If we, black people in the West, accept ourselves as Africans, we can make a contribution to the development of African culture, helping to free it from European imperialism. What we need is confidence in ourselves, so that as black people and Africans, we can be conscious, united, independent, and creative. A knowledge of African achievement in arts, education, religion, politics, agriculture, and mining of metals can help us gain a necessary confidence which has been removed by slavery and colonialism. Marcus Garvey always preached the values of African history and culture. He wrote that, quote, "For many years, white propagandists have been printing tons of literature to express scattered Ethiopia, especially that portion within their civilization, with the idea that Africa is a despised place inhabited by S-words and cannibals. There where no civilized human beings should go," end quote. After dismissing that propaganda as completely false, Garvey continued, quote, "The power and the sway we once held passed away, but now in the 20th century, we are about to see a return of it in the rebuilding of Africa. Yes, a new civilization, a new culture shall spring up from among our people." Part 3. On the physical side, man is an animal, but is different from other animals in several important ways. The most outstanding physical qualities are the following. 1. Man walks upright. B. Human hands are adapted to making and handling tools. C. Man's comparatively bigger brain allows for higher thought, and man is referred to as Homo sapiens, which means thinking man. Homo sapiens first came into existence on the African continent. This fact has been established by archaeologists, people who study the material evidence of past societies, usually by digging up digging into the ground, by paleontologists, people who study the ancient climate and structures of the earth, and by other scientists who can find out the age of bones and rocks that existed millions of years ago. What these scholars say is that nearly 2 million years ago, man evolved in Africa, long before he came into existence elsewhere. Numerous remains of early human types have been found in eastern Africa, and a place in Tanzania called Olduvai Gorge is especially famous. Man in Africa, like man everywhere else, adjusted to his physical surroundings to produce human society and culture. The first form of society came out when individuals got together to hunt in groups. Probably the most important development in human history was the invention of agriculture. Strange as this may seem today, there was a time when the idea of growing crops and rearing animals did not occur to man. When the idea came about, hundreds of years were spent in collecting wild grasses and roots, which were brought into the service of man. Wild animals such as the cow and the horse were also tamed and used by man. If it was in the Middle East or West Asia that agriculture started about 10,000 years before the birth of Christ, because that region was well supplied by nature with grasses such as wheat and barley. Agriculture spread rapidly into Africa by way of Egypt. In the grasslands of Ethiopia and West Africa, certain new grain species were first brought into human use from the wild variety. Those grains from the millet family. Africa was also the home of certain varieties of rice, yams, beans, fruits, etc. Agriculture meant food to support the growing population and people settling down to build a stable society. All over the world, the greatest challenge to man was his environment or physical surroundings. Man in Africa learned to overcome the problems of his own environment. Advancing methods of agriculture development in Africa many hundreds of years before Europeans went to that continent. Irrigation, terracing, and crop rotations were all practiced. The other basic aspect of material culture, is concerned with the working of metals and the making of metal tools. Here again, metalworking spread into Africa from the West Asia, Middle East, becoming widespread long before the European arrived. And in some cases, the metal technology was highly developed. Africans in the Congo were famous for mining copper, and those in Sudan famous for their iron. Apart from tools and weapons, metal were used for ornaments, and where gold played its part. What all the above really means is that ancient Africa was in the mainstream of human history. Part 4. Apart from the material aspects of culture, and look at time. Culture, man has always produced things of the spirit. In fact, the development of religion, literature, and art is associated with higher forms of culture and civilization. In all of these fields, Africa can be proud of her achievements. Take, for example, the art of Africa. European books on the early development of man always praised the paintings and engravings made by man long ago in France, Germany, etc. There are similar paintings all over Africa, placed on huge rocks and showing the great variety of animals which were found in the African continent and which were hunted by Africans. The paintings and engravings, like man himself, appeared at the much earlier date in Africa than in Europe. As man progressed, he moved from simple rock painting to sculptures. African sculpture in wood, copper, bronze, and iron is recognized by the whole world, both for the remarkable skills with which the sculpture objects were produced and for their expression of beauty dignity, and other human spiritual qualities. Black Africans have developed in the same way as all mankind and have made their own contributions to humanity. Because we are simply a part of a single species, Homo sapien, or, quote, thinking man. As mentioned before, skin color by itself is insignificant. Both black Africans have given birth to white albino children, known as Jamaicans or Dudas, D-U-N-D-U-S-S. But these children were really no different from their parents. A man's physical makeup, one of the most fundamental things, is the type of blood, and blood groups do not conform to skin color. In other words, an African is physically closer to a European with the same blood group than he is to another African of a different blood type. Color has become important because the white man found it convenient to use racialism to exploit the black peoples of the world. As Africans, we will use the question of race to unify ourselves and to escape from the oppression at the hands of white men and their black lackeys. So long as there are people who deny our humanity as black people, then for so long must we proclaim and assert our humanity as black people. That is why our historical and cultural heritage is so important, and that is why we must proceed to live our culture, because culture is a way of life. We must recover what has taken away from us, and we must adapt in order to survive and keep on growing in a section of humanity. Here, it is very important to notice the question of technology. Europeans accuse black people of not inventing the wheel. They claim that our culture never included the construction of machines which work on the principle of the wheel, i.g. mills and wheeled transport. This is partly true, but all that can be said is that we never borrowed the principles of the wheel, for it was invented in China and borrowed by Europeans. Where our history and culture lack certain things, there is nothing wrong in borrowing. This imperial majesty, the emperor Haile Selassie, was the first African to realize the importance of the European invention of aircraft and sought aeroplanes, not to be like Europeans, but to protect Ethiopian culture by strengthening it with something new. Africans, especially youths, must learn new skills. That's all in big bold letters. We're in your bio? What do you mean you're in my bio? Oh, okay. Hello, antiquity. 5. The Nile civilization. The Nile is one of the greatest rivers of Africa and of the world. One branch, the Blue Nile, starts in Ethiopia, while the White Nile starts in Uganda. They come together in Sudan and then flow through Egypt to the sea. Few sites are most spectacular when then the Murchison Falls on the White Nile and the Tassissat Falls on the Blue Nile. But the Nile is famous not just because of its length and great beauty, but because it is the cradle of ancient civilization. The history of Egypt, of the pharaohs, is well known, and it should not be difficult to obtain a good book with photographs. White people are quick to deny that ancient Egypts were Africans, by which they mean that Egyptians were not black. The ancient Egyptians usually portrayed themselves as the color red. And their empire included black subjects from further up the Nile. Red intermarried with black people, and for many years, the line of black the black kings ruled Egypt. There is no evidence to show that racial discrimination was a part of their culture. Yet, according to white man's way of seeing things, the red and the black population of Egypt would have been classed as, quote, people of color, or the N word with the O at the end. Christ was a member of the Essene group of Jewish people from Egypt, where he lived where he alive today, he would suffer from racial discrimination. On the Nile, one of the Nile's kingdoms, which is much less known than Egypt, is that of Cush, sometimes called Meroe, Meroe, which was the capital city of a long time. For a long time, sorry. Cush was situated in the northern Sudan. Those populations were black Africans. It was at one time a province of Egypt, but it achieved its independence and built up a society that was scarcely inferior to that of Egypt. In fact, 800 years before the birth of Christ, Cush was powerful enough to invade Egypt and take over the throne of the pharaohs. Their rule in Egypt came at the end more than 100 years later, when Hattia armies invaded from Syria, armed with superior weapons. The people of Cush were famous for their manufacture and fine pottery, beads, jewelry, and ornaments, and they were an important source of gold in the ancient world. The first capital city, Napata, and the second, Meroe, were international trade centers, in touch with Africans in every direction, especially Egypt to the north and Ethiopia to the south. Beyond the shores of Africa, they were in touch with Syria, Persia, Rome, Greece, and India. Women played an important part in the political structure of Cush, and this is something found in most parts of Black Africa. There were many great queens of Cush, and it was felt that Cadence, mentioned in the Bible, was queen of Ethiopia. Many really have been a queen of Cush. Cush was not as magnificent as Egypt in the building of pyramids and temples, but in one respect, Cush surpassed even the glories of Egypt, and that it was in the maturing of iron. Up to today, the hills of slag or waste material from iron smelt are still to be seen near Meroe in Sudan. Meroe was an industrial center in the heart of Africa, helped to spread the techniques of iron smelting and iron working to other peoples of the continent. The name of Cush and Meroe are part of our historical heritage as Africans. That was all in bold letters and big caps to emphasize the thing. Section 5. The earlier history of Ethiopia, part 1. The area of Ethiopia is 395,000 square miles, which is about 90 times the size of Jamaica. 1/3 of the area is highland, and it is in highland Ethiopia that most of the earlier historical developments took place. This highland was a natural defense against invasion and also a barrier to ease communication with the rest of Africa. In fact, within Ethiopia itself, steep valleys divided the mountains and make it difficult to get from one place to another. The Abi and the Blue Nile separates the northern highlands and Amarha, Amhara, and Gojam, Gojjam, from those of Sho to the south, Shoa. The isolated hilltops of Ambas, as they are called, were often used as mountain fortresses or as monasteries, such as those in Dabra Lambonas and Dabra Tamar. Ethiopia is a land of diversity. Many different factors came together to form the Ethiopian empire and culture. There are several different peoples with different languages, different ways of making a living, and different religions. Among the principal group, we find the Amhara, Amhara, and Asu, and Gala, and the Amhara speak a language which is called Semitic, relating to the Jewish language, while other peoples speak languages related to Arabic or other African languages such as the Nilotic. One of the fertile highlands and the fanners grew a varieties of millet contributed by Ethiopian to Africa and the world. One of the grasslands we find pastoralists, individuals who specialize in rearing of cattle. And from earlier times, fishing was of importance in the lakes and rivers. Naturally, modern Ethiopia has many other kinds of workers and skills which were not present from the earliest days. Many people are surprised by the diversity of religion which still exists in Ethiopia today. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is supreme within the state, but there are large numbers of Muslims and Amharists, Africans following the old religion of their forefathers, and there are even a number of Jewish people. All of these people, in spite of different languages, religions, etc., are subjects of the same government, which today under him, Emperor Haile Selassie I. Ethiopians can differ in skin color from light brown to jet black, but none of them are really different from black Africans outside of Ethiopia. White propaganda likes to suggest that the achievement of Ethiopia are not the achievement of Africa. Marcus Garvey knew about this lying propaganda and made it look ridiculous. He wrote as follows: Professor George Carcernor, often after describing the genius of the Ethiopians and their high culture during the periods of 750 BC to AD 350 in the middle Africa, declared that the Ethiopians were not Africans, black people. They used the N word, of course. He described them as people of dark people of color races, showing a mixture of black blood, image of, oh my gosh, this dude is so racist. Dark colored men in the Middle East being anything else but a N-word with the O. Some white men, whether they be professors or not, certainly have a wide range of imagination. So that guy was ancient Ethiopia before the coming of Christianity. In the Ethiopian highlands in ancient times, the main group of people were the Agu. I don't know how to say Agaau. Hundreds of years before the birth of Christ, many people from the Yemen and Arabian crossed the Red Sea into Ethiopia. These were known as Sabins, and they brought the language of Gizi, I think it's Giz, which is still used in Ethiopian church. The Sabines were interested in trade, and they set up a number of trading ports and towns in Eritrean coast of the Red Sea and in the nearby mountains. By far, the most important of these towns was Axum in the highlands of Tigray, and Axum was the foundation upon which the Christian empire was later built. Axum and its Red Sea port of Adilas were centers of international trade, exporting perfumes, incense, ivory, and gold to Egypt, Persia, Syria, India, and throughout the Greek and later the Roman Empire. As such, Axum was also the center of culture, and one of its earlier kings, oh my gosh, here we go, Zoskolas, spoke and wrote Greek perfectly. Above all, Axiom and similar centers created the first elements of the special Ethiopian culture. The Sabines became Ethiopians. The relations between the newcomers and previous inhabitants produced an Aramaic language and produced a special form of architecture, not found anywhere else outside of Ethiopia. A strong kingdom grew up, which spread from Tigray further into Ethiopia and also across the Red Sea into Yemen and Arabia. Less powerful rulers had to pay tribute to the king of Axiom, so that even before the coming of Christianity, the king of Ethiopia was a king of kings, quote unquote. Section 7. The development of Ethiopian church and Aramaic culture. Just before the coming of, okay, you got 20 minutes. Just before the coming of Christianity to the empire of Axiom, there were 3 different forms of religion. 1, Amist. I think it's Aminist, Animis. Traditional, beliefs in reverence for ancestors. 2, beliefs in gods of Arabia, such as Merhim, the god of war. And 3, the Jewish faith. Conversions began in the province of Tigray, which was the center of the ancient empire of Axiom. The Christian nature of Ethiopian kingdom is traced back to the union of Solomon and Shabi, and is recorded in the Kabri Nagast, or, quote, the glory of kings, end quote. Many Ethiopians consider the Kabri Nagast and the account of the union of Solomon and Shabi as nothing but a fable with no truth whatsoever. They claim that Shabi was in Arabia and not in Ethiopia, and that Christianity entered Ethiopia for the first time 330 years before the birth of Christ, where there are Greek documents which say that about the year AD 330, Azuna, the king of Axiom, was converted to Christianity by, oh my gosh, Frumentus, a Syrian bishop sent by the patriarch of Alexandria in Egypt. On the question of the relations of Solomon with Shaba, it must be remembered that Ethiopian ruled large parts of Arabia, so that even if Shabab was in Arabia, the queen of Shabab, quote unquote, would still have to have been one of the titles of the queen of Ethiopia. Furthermore, even if it is impossible to prove that matter historically, one way or another, the Kabra Nagast still remains a vital cultural document which correctly emphasizes the ancient nature of the link between Ethiopia and the Hebrew world before the birth of Christ. This document is symbol of Aramaic culture, for the culture developed out of the relations between Africa and the Near East. The presence of the Phalasha, the Falashas, as, quote, black Jewish people in Ethiopia is very important fact. Some authorities consider them to be one of the 10, quote, lost tribes of Israel, and they were among the earliest inhabitants of Ethiopia. This is proved by the fact that their belief and systems of worship go back to the patterns set by Moses, and they had no knowledge of the more recent developments in the Jewish faith, such as the Talmud, the Bible of the modern Jewish people. Assalamu alaikum. Alaikum salam. Ethiopia was a major center of a biblical world, quote unquote, along with Jordan, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. And it is clear that Christianity must have begun to spread in Ethiopia from the earliest days of Christ's teachings. What probably happened is that there was a struggle until Christianity gradually became the official religion, and Ethiopia became a part of the structure of the international church. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has certain special features, and here we're going to go over them. A. It is a church based on the people of their way of life, even when converting animists to Christianity. It respects their previous culture and adapted part of it. For example, while the Western Church always tries to suppress African music and any popular music, the Ethiopian Church worships and celebrates the sounds of drums and other instruments of the people. Similarly, while the common people of Europe were spoken to be priests and to unknown tongues of Latin, the people of Ethiopia used their own language, Giza or Aramaic, to express themselves inside and outside the church. B. Some of the ancient Hebrew practices of the Ethiopian Phalastias were also respected, such as the ban against eating of pork. C. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has preserved many of the features of the earlier Christian church, and many of the books in their worship are considered to be apocryphal by the Western Church. According to the Western Church of Europe, the books of Enoch, Jubilees, and Ecclesiasticus are not authentic. Ecclesiasticus were not authentic, but these biblical books, which the Ethiopians have today, were translated into Gaziese long before Western world was familiar with Christian writings. D. The Ethiopian Church has a strong tradition of mosaic. I gotta look up this word, everybody. Be right back. I gotta say it right. The word, but I have it. Here we go. Here it is. Effects. And this is what it is. A religion, a religious way of life where individuals withdraw from worldly societies and to dedicate themselves to spiritual pursuits, often living under vows and in communities. I don't know how to say that word. Or along Aramaic, focusing on prayer, self-discipline, and service. Okay. That's good. All right. Individuals withdrew from the daily life of society to become monks and hermits in isolated places on the ambas or the mountaintops. This was due to the influence of the Eastern Church. For as part of the world religion, the Ethiopian Orthodox faith had international connections. Ethiopian traditions explains the fermentus and the Abba Salama was important because he was the first man with authority to ordain priests in Ethiopia under the Patriarchal of Alexandria in Egypt. Up until 1948, the Abuna, or Archbishop of Ethiopia, was consecrated by the Patriarchal of Alexandria. The Ethiopian Church has survived for centuries in spite of many dangers. The first threat came from the animists, Agu peoples. In the 10th century, the Agu, under their queen Esther, defeated the Christian kingdom of Ethiopia. For 133 years, the Salmonic line was disposed by the royal dynasty called the Zangui. However, some of these Zangui rulers were zealous Christians and kept the Christian empire alive. The most famous Zangui was called, oh my gosh, the Lalibela. He ruled at the end of the 12th century and built 11 of the remarkable rock churches of Ethiopia. They were carved out of solid rock. When the Salmonic dynasty returned in AD 2070, they had to fight against the Jewish and the Muslims and Muslim people, Jewish people and Muslim people, the Falashas, I can't say it, Falashas. Sorry, everybody. The important thing to notice is that when Jewish and Muslim people were overcome militarily, they still had place in the social, political, and economic life of Ethiopia. Section number 8. We got Timorese. The Western Sudan. Today, the name Sudan is given to an independent African nation, which has borders with Egypt and Ethiopia. In earlier times, the whole of African south of the Sahara Desert was called the Arabic Balad is Sudan, which means the land of black people. They use the S word. I can't say that. That's racist for me. And the terms Western Sudan refers to an area which today includes the independent states of Senegal, Mali, Ghana, Guinea, Niger, Upper Volta, and Chad, along with the northern parts of Nigeria. This is an area of the greatest importance in the development of African history and culture. The Western Sudan was an area of grassland and woodlands, which had great advantages over the desert country to the north and over the thick forest to the south. It was possible to make rapid progress in agriculture in this region of Africa, produced several new grains suitable for human consumption. 3 of the most widely used being, oh my gosh, here we go, sorghum and pennisetum, pennisetum, and a species of rice which grows in flooded fields. The Western Sudan was also quick to borrow and mastered the technical skills of mining and refining iron. After these skills became known in Egypt, Meru, and North Africa, using iron tools and the inhabitants of the region produced a supply of food which allowed the population to expand. Apart from food crops, they also brought into use a certain variety of cotton. Skilled workers were engaged in the manufacturing of iron, cloth, and pottery. And through that exchange of goods over lost distances, there arose the need for professional traders. The society had therefore become specialized in its economic operations. The fact that people could move about easily in the open countryside meant that there were constant contacts between the different sections of the Western Sudan. For instance, there was one of the few areas in Africa where it was possible to use horses in large numbers. It means that there was a reasonable degree of unity where things such as language and religion were concerned. And it means, too, that there were numerous little things such as way people dress, the way they cooked, their meals, and the way they greeted each other, which were all done in the same way. There was, therefore, a common culture or a way of life in Western Sudan, a culture that was part of a broader African pattern, but which had certain special features, as we have seen in the case of Aramaic Ethiopian culture. That it kept producing large kingdoms and political empires. From the earliest centuries of the Christian era, right up to the arrival of European colonialists in the last century, the Western Sudan had no lack of complex political states covering huge areas of territory. It is necessary to conclude that the discussion of Western Sudan on the Empire of Mali in particular, its founder was Sudatia Katia, or a political military genius, Mobibo Katia, and first head of state of the Republic of Mali, is a descendant of Sandita Katia. I can't say it. Obviously, this is a source of pride and confidence for the inhabitants of that part of Africa, but we too can share those feelings. Another famous name in the history of Mali was Massa Musa, who was noted both for his military skill and his devotion to Islam. He made the famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, carrying 100 camel loads of gold, most of which was spent in Egypt and caused dislocation of Egyptian economy. Massa Kakan Musa became a legend, not only in his own country, but also in Egypt, Italy, Arabia, and for after his pilgrimage, all world maps clearly and accurately included the country of Mali. That sort of journey had great economic and cultural consequences. It was followed by the exchange of diplomatic missions and by the arrival in Mali of architects, craftsmen, and Muslim teachers. Most foreign visitors went to the city of Timbuktu. In the English language, Timbuktu is often used as a sense of the most backward place on earth. Yet, as long ago as the 14th century, when Europe was emerging from its own, quote, dark ages, Timbuktu was the largest city in West Africa, one of the most famous in the world as the center of gold trade, as a city of learning. There were numerous schools at all levels using Arabic language, and the Sankora Mosque was a home of the university, producing theologians, lawyers, linguists, and geographers. The visitors of Timbuktu about 550 years ago wrote as follows, quote, "In Timbuktu there are numerous judges, doctors, and clerics, all receiving good salaries from the king. He pays great respects to the men of learning. There is a great demand for books and manuscripts, import from Barbary. More profit is made from the book trade than from any other line of business." End quote. In a city which was renowned for its trade in gold, there was more profit to be made from books than from any other line of business. In other words, learning was valued more highly than gold. Interesting. Number 9. This might be the last one. Hold on, let me see. Okay, number 9, and then we'll finish. I'll finish number 9 up. West African coast. On the coast, the conditions did not permit the growth of huge empires, for the thick forest limited agriculture, population, and movement. Nevertheless, there were places where even the serious disadvantages imposed by nature had been partly overcome. Populations have grown large and settled enough to allow big political states to come into existence. The two most important areas of development were the west sections of Nigeria and the mouth of the river Congo. As in Western Sudan, the small states of Western Nigeria and Lower Congo had grown until they controlled other small states on the basis of family relations. The Yoruba in Western Nigeria there was a single culture, and language, which was called Yoruba. And the Yoruba were established at and Elf by about the 12th century AD. And shortly afterwards, they set up another center at Oyo. In fact, Oyo became more important politically, militarily, and economically. But El and Elf remained the spiritual and constitutional head of Yorubaland. Yoruba tradition spread eastward to the Ido and Benin at the mouth of the river Niger, and westward into what is now Dahomey, where the kingdoms of Alindia, and Wada, and Dahomey were established in the 6th century. Did I say 6? Okay, yeah, I was right. The Yoruba and the Edo of Benin had been very stable political systems and well-organized economies, but they were famous above all of their sculptures. They produced sculptures in wood, ivory, terracotta, a red clay, and in minerals such as iron, bronze, and brass. Today, the finely fashioned head and wall placards of Ife, and Benin were the wonders of museums' worlds. When the first examples were discovered by Europeans in the 19th century, they argued that the work was not done by Africans. Perhaps the Greeks of Carthage, or Carthaginians, had visited Nigeria a long time ago. They said that, or perhaps the sculptures were done by early Portuguese travelers. But slowly the undeniable truth dawned on everybody that the art treasures of Yoruba and Edo had to be accepted as examples of African culture. Africans everywhere, including Haiti and other parts of the West, have shown their tremendous talents in the plastic arts, those which have to do with carving and molding. The art of Ife and Benin is typical of all African in many respects. The really different features is that it was done in metals, which survived over centuries, while the wood sculptures and other parts of Africa have been the victims of termites, rot, breakage, etc. We know that before the birth of Christ, there was a civilization in central Nigeria, which made terracotta figures, similar to those which Ife and Benin were to make in metals from the 12th century onwards. There is little doubt that a developed society flourished in that region throughout the centuries after the birth of Christ. At Nok, N-O-K, the Africans mined and smelt tin, the important copper from Tagida, a place in the Sahara, and with the copper and tin, they were able to make bronze. They lacked zinc, which is required to manufacture brass, but they imported brass all the way from the Middle East, Western Asia, which shows how far the Yoruba were able to extend their trade and culture contacts. Probably this is why some Yoruba still insist that their ancestors came from West Asia, Middle East. The Yoruba manufactured iron, copper, glass beads, cloth, and other everyday items such as pottery. The skilled craftsmen were grouped together in guilds, which is exactly the way that skilled workers were organizing themselves in Europe at the time. The guild in Western Nigeria were under the control of the ruler of Ife, Ayo, and Benin, where they served the interests not just of the royal family, but also a powerful religious society. Even these cultures were neither Christian nor Muslims. They were religious. And then we'll end right there, and we'll start tomorrow on chapter 5, African History and the Service of Black Revolution. So he said that one of the major things that white racism does is it doesn't allow the whole engagement of African history, and it takes that from them and steals that from them. And he's giving the importance of the historical natures, that it will empower the African people, so that way they're not put in this whole no, you didn't do anything, everything was created, these people came instead, there's no that Egypt wasn't Africa, what are you talking about, you got no history, it was all because of us, so yeah. All right. Oh, cool, thanks. What's up, antiquity?
Hey,
What would you like to ask? What would you like to add?
Well, I mean, I've talked about being from Zimbabwe a little bit. I mean, Great Zimbabwe, which you mentioned very briefly, they created the ruins of what's now Great Zimbabwe, and they're the largest sub-Saharan structure in Africa, and they refuse to believe black people made that. So,
Okay. Yeah, 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 and it's like, especially with the Egyptian thing, right? Like the Egyptian thing is always centered around, oh, aliens came, and the Egyptians weren't black people; they weren't African people. You know what I mean? That crap.
and what doesn't help with that is that the last ruling class of Egypt was also white Greek people, and that just helped influence the Egyptians are white.
Yeah,
have appearances. No, the white people.
yeah, yeah, and like I can't imagine like I know that white supremacy and white culture strips away your culture, but like it strips away your culture for you to be able to put in a superior position, where like African people and people of color get their culture stripped away from them, but they're put in a position of servitude instead. Like you can't create these things, yeah. So it's like it's the whole like cultural imperialism that Walter Rodney talks about, huh?
Then they use those people to make things for them.
Yes,
And claim it.
yeah, exactly. By the time I put this on, before, but yeah, like I'll never learn that experience. I can only go off, like, for instance, Irish. The English definitely did their first colonization of Ireland and of Scotland, and they did the same exact shit to Irish people that they do now and have done to like people of color and stuff. Now the Irish people are now part of the white society, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all I had to add, but I won't keep you any longer.
I'm so glad you come up and add. I appreciate you.
No problem.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions or anything that they want to talk about? All right. So, like, the next thing we're going to be reading, I got to put this in my notes. You write this in my notes. I can't wait. I'm so glad that not only does he touch on the economic things, you know, of exploitation, but he touches on the religious and the cultural thing of Africans that have been stripped from those things and the connections and stuff. So I like how he's using historical materialism in this aspect right now, which is great. You know? What chapter? 5.
5? Oh, I don't know. Yeah, no, I think him being able to center his points on all three of those really does show the influence of like what happened to African societies all across Africa. Just focusing on one doesn't explain the full picture of what's really going on.
And no, it doesn't. That's the whole point of like describing the other ones, because like in
They're
order
all
to, huh?
They're interconnected.
They're all interconnected. Yes, because that's the whole thing. That's the whole idea. Like through Marxism, that I learned that everything is interconnected. That's how I learned that everything's interconnected, because dialectical materialism is connected to everything. There's always interconnections in everywhere. You know what I mean? Nothing is stagnant from one another, you know? And that's the whole point, to drive the point that they did trade routes, they did engagement, they interacted with one another, they had influences of their culture through other empires and stuff. Like the fact that Timbuktu was like having valued in knowledge more than gold also tells me like that like they weren't completely like, you know, the other way around, you know? But, you know, they still went through feudal relations and stuff like that. They still went through communal relations and stuff like that. But they were disrupted by the Europeans, you know, and purposely, like the other book I just read, purposely underdeveloped, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they were underdeveloped and stripped of their resources for European gain.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, if you have anything else and you don't have anything else, I'm going to go ahead and close it out and go feed Rufus and stuff. I appreciate you. Actually, I don't know. Who's this person up here?
That's what I don't know.
Reasoner, who are you? That could be a. Hold on. Are they Who's Reasoner? I have no idea who Reasoner is. Donation. Oh, they're up here for donations, I think. It says Hurricane Melissa relief. UK government matches. Your donations, every £1 equals £2. Donate here. Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry I didn't get you. I'm sorry I didn't get you any coins. I'm sorry. I'm broke.
Just 1 second. I got a little.
Oh, wait. I might have, actually, what am I saying? I might have some coins. How much coins do I have? I keep forgetting. Let's do 5 there. I keep forgetting. 5 here. I try to like spread it out evenly, and I can't. It's too hard.
I get that.
There we go. That's the best I can do, everybody. All right, then. Well, I don't know if Two Spirit and them are going to go live. I went live last night because I thought maybe I'd give them a break and stuff. So I don't know what they're going to do tonight. You know, I might just go on a.
I definitely
go
need to start going live.
Huh?
I need to start going live. I'm just lazy.
Lazy's not a thing. Yeah. But anyways, I appreciate you. I appreciate you, and I hope you have a good night. I hope to see you around. All right.
Well, you will.
All right. Cool. All right, everybody. Good night. Talk to you later.